Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Răzvan Tudor, and I'm going to be the host of an interview tonight with Mr. Brett Minchington, International Employer Brand Strategist, who happened to be in Bucharest to run the International Employer Brand Leadership Training. Brett, welcome to Romania.
Hello there, nice to be here.
Well, Brett, you were talking a lot about employer branding. You have been covering 27 countries already talking about employer branding. What is it in fact, employer branding?
It's a good place to start, is defining it. So your employer brand is how your employees, candidates, customers and stakeholders perceive you as a great place to work. So it's an image that sits in their mind. They have an opinion about your organisation. So I'll give an example like a Microsoft. When I say this word, you will conjure up an image of what it would be like to work there. Now, in reality, most companies don't have the benefit of having such a strong corporate brand as Microsoft. So what they're doing is certain tactics and strategies so that they can build their awareness to the market, so that the external market and also the internal market can understand what they truly offer as an organisation. So why would someone want to work for your organisation? What makes them stay and what makes them refer their organisation to others as well. So it's becoming much more prevalent for organisations now, simply because we have a crisis on our hand. We have an issue with companies seeking growth and innovation and not having the talent that can actually deliver that. So it's becoming much more competitive, not just here in Romania, right across the world. All companies are finding it extremely difficult to attract and importantly hold on to the talent that are going to drive their businesses forward.
Well, as far as I remember, the economic theory said something about you need about 3 factors in order to succeed. One was labor, one was capital, and the other one was land. Later on, innovation came on board. Later on, talent came on board. When we're talking about talent and attracting talented people to work for us, how hard it is, for instance, for a company to do that. I mean, you talked about Microsoft, but Microsoft, it's a big corporation. If you go to a much lower level or to a local level, to entrepreneurial level, what these guys can do in order to attract talents for their businesses?
Sure. So it doesn't matter whether you're a well-known brand or a lesser-known brand. If your candidates, your target audience, understand what you offer as an employer and you can reach that messages out to them, they're more likely to engage with you. So, LinkedIn found that even if you are like a Microsoft, if a candidate knows about your employer brand, they're twice as likely to consider coming to work for you. Okay, so even at a level where their brand is not so well known, the important thing is for all organisations to understand who they are, what they offer. Okay, so they need to understand what the talent that they're looking to recruit is expecting in a employment experience. So they want to ensure that the people that they're attracting actually match what the organisation is going to help drive the organisation forward. So that might be at a values level. So they're very clear on what the company's offering at the values level, and then can communicate to the external market. So that people that fit those values are more likely to apply and consider working for them. A company like Google doesn't have a problem getting applications. What they have an issue with is actually getting the right match of the talent that is going to drive Google forward. Okay, so whether you're in an industry of well-known brands like in the tech industry, they're all competing for similar levels of talent. So what they'll also find is that if a talent is not happy at Google, they might shift to Apple or Microsoft. So this competition is happening at all levels, irrespective of whether they're a well-known brand or not so well-known brand.
Few might know that, for instance, the Maslow pyramid of hierarchy of needs, actually one was set up 100 years ago or even more, came out due to the need of the industrial society to have motivated workforce. And we had like physiological level, safety level, social level, self-esteem level, self-actualization level. And the higher you were, the more motivated you were to work for that company and the happier to deliver. What actually employer branding brings up more than this nowadays for big corporations or whomever considers to go to employer branding?
Sure. So, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what we're finding is the more developed markets is that talent are free to move with their skills. Okay, so that's putting pressure on organisations to actually deliver what the employee is looking for, because if they don't, they will go elsewhere. In developing markets where the skills, may be of a lower level and they're in high supply, then the pendulum is really in favour of the employer. Okay, but the smart employers, will develop a working environment so that it's fair, it's equitable, as opposed to the old days where they would companies would move into these developing markets just because it was cheap labour. Okay, so what we're seeing now is that organisations are developing employer brand strategies so that even if the labour source is cheaper, the actual working environment is adding value to the person's overall life, to their family life as well. So there's the exploitation of labour. Hopefully we're seeing that is going to reduce much further into the future as, technology allows us to expose those type of things.
Okay.
But all of the big corporate brands are on notice, and they know that, people are watching, and there's ways that, if they're participating in, poor practices or illegal practices or corruption, it will eventually be exposed and it will impact at the bottom level through people, being prevented in buying their products and services. We live in a much more open society these days.
Exactly. We were talking about earlier today with the example you had with Adidas Corporation. Very enchanting clip we saw about going to work for these guys. And on the other side, we are reading in the newspapers things like, okay, Adidas does that and that in Bangladesh, hire small kids to do the same job for $3 while the final product is sold for $100. And by the time I was talking to you, you gave me a very good insight about how to tackle these or to address these problems when you face them as a corporation. And I would like to elaborate a little bit on this.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that particular example, but the companies that are participating in these markets, number one, the awareness is a lot stronger now because of social media and technology being able to help us share this information wide. So these organisations are aware of what the expectations are, but they're developing strategies that are fair and equitable. So the important thing is that they're now also auditing these practices as well. So what may have happened in the past is that a company would say that it has fair work practices and good living, good working environment, but they weren't necessarily monitoring that. So the local leaders were doing their own thing, but what they're doing now is realising that it does impact at the customer level. It stops people from buying their products and services. So they have systems in place now to actually make sure that they're auditing these processes and that the working conditions are fair according to the local laws.
Okay, but I would go back from a different perspective. For instance, we were talking today about employee value proposition. And this sounds very appealing from the perspective of a person looking for a job. On the other side, we have unique selling proposition from the perspective of attracting a customer. What is the relationship between these two values and how employee value proposition could enforce or endorse or support the reaching or the materialization of the unique selling proposition?
Sure. So the unique selling proposition is like, what are the unique assets of that product or service? Why would you want to buy it? And the EVP, the employer value proposition, is what does the organisation offer me in return for my skills and services? But what we're seeing now is there's a blurring of the lines between the two. So if you could interlock the two together, what you would find in the middle is the return on investment. All right. So an example is like for example, Adidas. If I go into an Adidas store and ask for a pair of shoes for my son, and the shoes aren't in the store, then what the salesperson would then do would be able to, maybe pull out like a tablet and help me order the product online so that when I go home, the product is in the store the next day. So the unique selling proposition is that my son wants this particular pair of shoes so he can go and play football. And when the in-store experience delivered through the employee ensures that the candidate experience is outstanding. At the end of the day, I'll still buy the product. So the company makes money. I have a good experience in store and the employee has a good experience because they helped out a customer. So they're very closely linked. So this is happening in a lot of different industries now. So the best practice employer branding companies are starting to look at the relationship between the two a lot closer. So a company has one brand, okay? It's just that in the reality, the corporate, consumer and employer brand are usually managed by different departments. So to be able to deliver an on-brand experience, you need collaboration between the different functions that are responsible for it.
This is very smart, and what you said. And on the other side, we were talking today about the level of engagement. And this is a keyword with various semantics. But what struck me was the fact that you said that 12% out of the entire people that are employed are really engaged in the relationship with the employer or with the job they are doing.
Yes.
12% sounds very low.
Yes.
What is the driving force that can help a company to increase this level of engagement? What are the tools, the tactics they can
Sure.
use?
The first thing is that they've got to have the right leadership in place. Okay, so it doesn't matter how much money you spend, if you don't have the right leaders in place, you're not going to engage the workforce. But so what companies are doing is that they're looking at, they're doing some research to understand how engaged their people are, and then the smart companies are using that information to then put tactics and strategies in place. But number one, you've got to understand, what do people think about your organisation now? If you've recruited the right people in the first place, you're not going to have such an issue, all right? But recruitment is traditionally reactive. We have a vacancy, we need to fill it, let's get the person in quickly and away we go. What the smart companies are doing now is that they're spending more time on the assessment phase or connecting with candidates, understanding who the candidate is. So rather than them just finishing university, they've actually already had a relationship with the student over the 3 years of their course. All right, so they may have come in and done a 4-week internship in year 1, year 2, year 3. So by the time they graduate, they go straight into the organisation. So companies are taking a much longer term view to their talent attraction, and hence why social media now is the most popular, the most common employer branding initiative that companies are using. All right, because there's channels to market, they can communicate with the different target audiences, and the target audience is also, to their benefit, participating on these channels anyway. So personal branding is also becoming a lot popular amongst young people, but also older people as well. Most professionals are on LinkedIn, all right? So companies are finding it easier to actually connect with them. So we've got the technology, we've got the social orientation that's helping to connect available jobs with available talent. So I talked earlier on about the talent mismatch. Hopefully we get to a stage where companies have a much better insight into who they're employing, so that they won't have this engagement problem when the person sort of has their employment at the organisation. Because disengaged people, what the research shows, they don't leave the organisation, they just stay, make everyone miserable. The best people, they leave. All right, so you've got to have the right leaders in place, and the leaders set the culture in the organisation.
There is one question you addressed to the room today, but I never got your answer as far as I remember. Okay. What are the trends you see in the next 3-5 years in this field of activity?
Sure. So I discussed the trends right at the end, but I talked about the two key trends around the area of technology and social media. Okay, so these are platforms that are allowing people to connect and collaborate. Okay, so it's helping us to understand the two, so the company and the candidate. So it doesn't take away, so the technology allows us to communicate and collaborate better, but the basics of human interaction, right, will always be there. Okay, so just because you have a nice LinkedIn profile doesn't mean that I'm going to employ you, all right? But the technology, both technology that allows us to communicate better internally, but also the social media networks that allow us to reach talent externally, I see that those are going to continue to advance. The data that individuals are putting into the system is going to be a lot richer, and it'll get us a lot closer to what companies are looking for and what talent are looking for. So we'll start to get better matches. But the basics of employing people in your organisation that fit the culture and the value, that's not going to go away. It's just that we're going to use technology and social media to help us do that faster and hopefully more efficiently and hopefully at a better cost. So that, you know, there's a job for everyone in this world, isn't there? So it's a matter of like matching them up with the right type of roles, because if we can put the right people in the right roles, companies will innovate and progress a lot further, which will create more jobs. And that's how, you know, we're seeing this happening in India and China now. So more people are moving into middle class. That puts pressure on the system, so more goods get created, and then it's a cycle moving forward. But eventually we'll get a stage where there's no developing nations. All right. So at the end of the day, you're going to go work for a company that is at the top of that sort of Maslow hierarchy of needs. They're fulfilling my intrinsic needs. All right, so that the pay is okay, the career development's okay, but what I'm really looking for is coming to work every day and feeling inspired because I work for really nice people, and I go home at the end of each day knowing that I, you know, did a meaningful job and I feel good inside. That's the end game.
I would like to thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Razvan Tudor, and you are watching Business Days TV.